Hi, Darcie. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you, Whitney.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be doing this with you. Would you mind introducing yourself? And then I'd love if you shared a bit about your story.
Yeah, so I'm Darcie Carr. One thing I want to probably preface this with saying that I'm hoping that I'm kind of coming from a place where I'm speaking more from scars versus my wounds. I know we all do. We all have a lot of wounds, and we've had those trusted people we can speak to from that place. But I hope the last 2.5 years, or I should say actually maybe closer to two, that there's been more healing. And so I'm able to speak more from the scars versus the wounds. And then the other thing I want to say is, when I share what others have said, I hold no grudge or bitterness towards those individuals. I believe the right things they said and the wrong things they said had to be said to even answer prayers that I was praying at that time. And then just the last thing is I don't feel any story is worthy of sharing unless it speaks to God's faithfulness. So I hope throughout our conversation people can see that thread of God's faithfulness through the journey that my husband and I have gone this last it's been over 2 years since March, but really
Mhm.
for us, stepping forward in faith, it's been about a year and a half. So I
Mhm.
am fourth generation professing on my mom's side, second on my dad's. We've lived in a lot of states. My husband and I have lived in 7 different states, anywhere from Montana to Indiana right now. And so we've seen a lot, been around a lot of workers, been in a lot of professing people's homes. To speak just to like my earlier childhood growing up in truth, I always kind of feel guilty sometimes when people say, how much they loved convention. Because
Mhm.
convention for me was really, really hard. My home state was Montana, so there was a lot of family professing in those conventions. And my sister and I were unfortunately awkwardly very shy and quiet. So every year I'd go to convention, I would hope to make friends, and it never quite panned out. In fact,
Mhm.
one of the stories that I remember, when we used to pour water in water pitchers, and there was these three little girls, and they were adorable. They were just adorable, and they were cousins, and they were standing in front of me, and they turned around, and I smiled, and they turned around, and one of them said something to the other, and they turned back around, and instead of being greeted with a smile, they all three stuck their tongues out at me. So that was the start of my convention. And I will say, actually, all the way through my teenage years, I remember pulling back out onto the freeway after convention was done and thinking, oh, I survived another year. So it
Mhm.
wasn't, it was different for me growing up. And then, the whole childhood, the dresses, and we talk about that. And my sister and I, we still to this day remember at our school there was this thing called Friday Flip Up Day, where if you were wearing a dress, the goal was to flip up your dress. And
No
so,
way.
like, yeah, so there, my sister and I always talk about like the trauma and fear we had that please don't let someone catch us. And finally, because Montana was so cold, my mom agreed to let us wear pants under our dress. And I was probably 6 or 7 when I looked at my mom and I said, okay, so it's okay if we wear pants under the dress, but not pants without the dress. And she kind of looked at me. She's like, oh. So somewhere along the line, I don't think we fought her, but she kind of gave up that very quickly. Thankfully, I'm honestly thankfully, because it was such a struggle. And so through my teenage years, they were teenage years. I
Mhm.
professed when I was 8. And looking back, so many people have talked about, did you really know what you were doing? And I truthfully can't answer that question. I was a people pleaser at a very young age, still probably am to an extent, but I know in my heart when I professed was when I was standing in my kitchen, and my husband and I got married very young, and we were, pretty dirt poor. And I was holding my little baby that I got pregnant 6 months after we got married, as you know, a lot of young or professing people get married very young. And I remember thinking I had nothing like material to give her. And all I had was if I had God in myself. And I remember holding her and going, Jesus, I need you. And I
Mhm.
really believe that's when I professed in my heart. And my life took a different path as far as how I approached reading and praying. So every day, just very thankful that we all have a professing story. That was probably one thing that always bothered me because my dad was not raised in the truth, and he always had a story. And my husband's parents weren't raised in the truth, and they had a story. And but it was always when they meant the truth, not when they meant Jesus. And so for me, I remember telling my kids, you have a story. Everyone knows the moment that Jesus came into their life. So don't think you don't have a story. So I try to encourage that with them really quick. And then through the years, I would say I saw little cracks here and there, especially living in so many different states. Obviously, you know what the West Coast is like versus the East Coast or the Midwest.
Mhm.
And, we lived down in Texas for a while. So we saw a little of it all. And we're just kind of always trying to fit in with wherever we lived. I think for me, I want to speak a little bit to exclusivity because I think everyone has a different how they've gotten there. And for myself, I don't know when it was, and I think a lot of us started to feel like there's just no way. There's no way we are the only people going to heaven. So I know for my kids, I didn't probably maybe the last 10 years did not ever speak to that. In fact, I would tell them, there's a lot of people out there that have relationships with God other than people that go to meetings. And I remember our one son, he was in high school. We were driving back from Wednesday night meeting, and he was my quiet one. And he usually didn't say a whole lot. And all of a sudden, he pops up from the back of the car and goes, "Mom," he goes, "I have a question. Because what would you do if one of us left meetings?" And I said, "Well, my first question would be, are you leaving God? And if the answer is no, then I wouldn't worry about you." He goes, "Okay." And then I'm like, "What are you thinking about leaving?" I'm like, because if we need to talk, and he goes, "No, I just wondered." So even though us as parents did not preach it, they picked up on it. And it
Mhm.
was very real, what we would hear with the undertones. And one thing that I loved when I started really searching was Jesus when he healed. He used many methods of healing. And so it was so that no one could duplicate the method of healing. And they had to understand it wasn't the method of healing, it was the man that was healing. And so it's the same, like, we wanted to be so exclusive that we were the only way here on earth. But all
Mhm.
along, Jesus was saying, no, it's the man. It's me. And so often, we thought we had to preach or talk Jesus to people, but then get them to meeting. And I always struggle with that because I felt like I had failed. I was a stay-at-home mom for a long time. And when I had my
Mhm.
first job, I worked in a bank. And there was a couple ladies, they're like, "Oh, I love talking Jesus with you." And one eventually retired, and she wrote in her little note, she goes, "I always think of you as the person that made me think more about God." And I remember, even though I did not believe in exclusivity, I felt like I had failed because I had never invited her to meetings. And so again, even though that was a belief in my heart, I still felt and I still lived by exclusivity. It's like, well, I didn't do good enough. I
Mhm.
didn't get you to meetings, or I didn't invite you to meetings. And so that was always hard for me because God and Jesus were the most important thing. And God and Jesus were what I loved to talk about. So then fast forward to 2023. So
Mhm.
obviously, I think God was preparing my heart a little bit. I had a meeting that I had went to maybe a year before it happened, and I was sitting there. It was Sunday morning, and I'm like, why do I even come here? And then I
Yeah.
felt very, very condemned in my heart. Like, okay, well, get the right spirit, Darcie. That's not the right spirit. But I think God was literally, he was literally challenging me in that moment. Like, why do you come here? What is bringing you here every Sunday? And it's like, well, because it's meeting time. That's what we do on Sundays. And so my mom called me. They lived out in Montana, and my mom never we usually talk on Sundays. That's kind of how it is. So when my
Yeah.
my phone rang on a Friday, I was like, "Oh dear, like what's wrong? Something's not good." Well, she had said that there was some things that came out about Dean Brewer and that there was a letter most likely going to surface, and she pretty much told me what she knew about him. And I just remember being I was in shock because here's the thing. I really didn't know Dean Brewer that well. But because after we left Montana, or I should say after we got married, we left Montana. So I was only born and raised in Montana and lived there for, I guess that would be 19 years. And then I was out of that state. But I had gone back for Ronan convention, and it was morning time for prayer. And all the friends had said their prayer. And then all of a sudden, the older brother worker starts praying. And no lie, Whitney, I remember opening my eyes and saying, "Oh my word, who is this man that's so full of the Spirit?" And when he passed away, I remember speaking about that in a Sunday morning meeting. So God and I had a lot to wrestle with on that because I was angry. Like, how was I fooled? I mean, I literally wrote my mom a note, like, who is that worker? Like, he's so full of the Spirit. Like, I've never heard a prayer like that. One time I was just telling my husband, like, I'm like angry with God. He goes, I don't think it's good to be angry with God. And I had actually listened to Dr. David Jeremiah, and I listened to one of his sermons. He goes, have you ever been angry with God? He goes, it's actually okay. He goes, well, no, we don't want to stay angry. But when I prayed about it, the answer was so real to me. Like, did you ever ask for discernment? And I never had. I just trusted the workers were who they presented themselves to be. I trusted what I thought was the spirit, but I never asked for discernment before meetings to say, is this of you, God? Is what I or let me know if what I'm not hearing does not line up with your word. So anytime we are angry with God, he can take it, but it's going to come back on us and where we misstepped and didn't ask for extra help. So when I heard that, it was shocking and obviously just life altering, as we all know. I went to meeting that Sunday. My husband had to work because he works in grocery retail, so he has to work every now and then on Sundays. And I went, and I just assumed the whole world knew. Nobody knew. And I was speaking about betrayal, and I was crying, and I was a mess. And this went on for probably 2 weeks on both Wednesday and Sunday. And then John, my husband, got emotional about it too. And finally our elders are like, is everything okay? And they still hadn't known. So, I felt like certainly they would have known by now. So we asked them to come over. We said, well, we probably should sit down and have a conversation. So we invited our elders over. And again, please, when I saying stuff, the wrong things that are said, they just had to be said too. I hold no ill will towards anyone that said the wrong things because we all do from time to time. But we were sitting there and we explained what had happened. And our elder goes, oh, that's happened before. And I remember looking at him and going, you don't understand. This one is going to change the whole landscape of this thing that we call truth. And again, it was kind of just, kind of blown off. And again, even if it was just one, even one isn't okay to blow off. It's just not okay to blow off. And
Mm-hmm.
so I instantly started praying, is my soul safe here? And can I continue to spiritually grow in, quote, the truth? And I was talking with a good friend, and she's like, well, I can guarantee your soul's safe. I'm like, well, I'm going to wait for that answer from God. And she goes, well, really, our growth, isn't it dependent upon us? And I said, yes and no. But if there's a system that's not preaching truths, our growth is going to be stunted. We're not going to be able to grow as God needs us to. I just kept praying about that. And then I got a notebook and I wrote at the top of my notebook, the search for the truth, dot, 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 the real truth. You know, the verse that says, ask, knock, and seek, and you shall find. And oh, I don't think I knew with what power asking for truth really meant. And I did order Cherie's book, and I was still in that mind frame of hiding it. Hid it from my husband. I didn't want to tell anyone I'm reading a book that someone wrote. And one thing I will say, when I saw all the cracks from years past and things like our outward, I just knew they didn't matter, but I could play along with it, because the one thing that I thought that was of God was the ministry. But I had never really looked into those verses like I should have either. And so in Cherie's book, when it talks about them having to go to the house of Israel, I didn't even have to read the rest of her paragraph. I just stopped on those Bible verses and I'm like, they weren't even supposed to, like they were, it was just a mission to Israel. Like how did I miss this? And so
Mm.
once the cracks were very clear in the ministry as far as it's not actually biblical, the scales just kept falling off. And I would say for probably 3 or 4 months, my husband and I, we couldn't concentrate when we went to work. We were just, he would call me, he would get on CCF, and he would go, oh my, and I'm like, you're supposed to be working. He's like, I know. He goes, but I can't concentrate. And so it was just so overwhelming. And I will tell you, Whitney, every worker, because I didn't have real close relationships with workers. I was intimidated, and I had bangs as a teenager. So I was never one that they thought, oh, she's one of those good, I just was one of those people that I respect. Our home was always open. All 7 states we've lived in, we've had different meetings, but every brother worker, I should say, that there was one pivotal when I was a teenager. There was one pivotal through our married life, and things that we had gone to for some conversations. And then, of course, Dean. And like it was one after another that kept falling. And I remember looking at John going, is there one righteous man in that group? And I don't want to say that there wasn't. It was just heartbreaking to see the ones that I had held in esteem fall. And so we continued to go to meetings and through the summer of 23, and continued to pray that prayer, is my soul safe here? And then there was one day we were driving along a freeway, and I can see it as clear as day right now too. We were driving one way, there was construction, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there was a lamb, one single lamb running along the freeway in the opposite direction at, like his life was dependent on it. And the word that came to me was run. And I looked at John, I said, did I just imagine that? Did you just see that lamb right there? He's like, yeah. He goes, where did it come from? I'm like, I don't know. I said, but I go, the other crazy part is the word that just came to my heart was like, run. And he looks over at me, he's like, okay. So that was the kind of the start of our crazy summer of 2023. The friends here didn't really want to talk a whole lot about it. We had our elders over again, and unfortunately kind of got into heated discussion about some stuff. And it came down to, we were talking about all the CSA stuff and the fact that even the start, I had kind of known that there was this quote man associated, but everything was hush hush. When I saw the level of deceit that was used to cover up that, I looked at my husband again and said, well, no wonder we're crumbling, because we were built on a lie. And if you try to build something on deceit, it's not going to last. And so we were talking to our elders about this. And I said, I don't know. I said, if God leads me away, I said, I'm just going to have to follow. And my elder said, well, how did he say, well, what are you going to do if you leave meetings? And I said, I don't know, but I'm just going to have to trust God that he knows. And he said, well, you better hope so. And I said, well, no, I know so. If God literally leads me away, he's going to have something figured out for me. And so I remember asking him, like, well, what would ever make you leave meetings? And that's where the discussion got a little heated because he talked about, well, if women started wearing jewelry and makeup and doing stuff. And I'm like, I remember just having this blank feeling come over me, like, how are we seriously, when we're talking CSA and doctrinal stuff, worried about how a woman looks, and that's what would take you out of meetings? His poor wife, we're still good friends to this day. She's stayed in contact with me, but I remember we got so heated that she looked at me. She goes, "We're still friends. We're still." I mean, yes, we abs. I will be. That's what I'm supposed to do as a Christian. I will always be friends. My husband and I were pretty broken through that summer. None of the friends really seemed to want to talk about it. Our testimonies were very, very candid, but very broken, to the point where, our elders at one point said, we just want the happy John and Darcie back. And I said, well, we're really full of grief right now, and you get what you get. This is who we are. So we asked all the friends where we live if they would want together and just to get together and talk about this, because we knew other cities were doing this where they would talk. And they said they wouldn't do it unless the workers came. So the workers agreed to do that. There was 4 workers. One was the overseer of Indiana at that time, and his companion, and our 2 sister workers that were in the field. And I remember, like, just praying. I was just walking around my backyard, just looking up to heaven, going, God, how did we get here? Like, what happened? But help us make this right. Like, we've got to make this right. And I don't know what came over me, because I am not someone that speaks a lot in a big crowd of people. And afterwards, my husband just kept looking at me, he goes, oh my word. He goes, you were just so good. He's like, where did that all come from? I'm like, I have no clue. What did I say? I mean, I really didn't even know what I was saying, Whitney. I just knew. And to this day, I probably can't really remember what I said, except for one thing. I remember thinking, a lot of people were talking about doing away with conventions that summer. And I said, if we have conventions, we ought to be on our hands and knees, begging God for forgiveness for what we've done and finding a way forward. And you would have thought I had horns. Like, the thought of us getting together and praying about this. And even I'm really regretting now that we didn't start that meeting out with prayer. I remember my husband and I were the only ones that had our Bibles out. No one else came with them. We didn't tell them, but I thought we might turn to scripture to talk about this stuff. So, and one thing that haunts me from that listening meeting was, after the meeting was done, the overseer's companion at that time, a man that I dearly love, and thankfully nothing's been said about him, but he came up to me and he said, so I work in HR, so I deal with all the interesting in my job with people issues. And he said to me, he goes, Darcie, after this all gets fixed, can we talk about some HR problems in the ministry? And I just looked at him, and at first I didn't understand what he was talking about. Now I do. Like, now that we know what all goes on, and this is a man that's been in the work forever too. And so for him to say that, and it tells me he was maybe hopeful that something was going to get resolved. And then let's deal with all the other problems that exist in the ministry. So that meeting nothing good came out of it, unfortunately, like most of them. So then we went off to convention, and we really debated, because I will say, every time I thought about going to a meeting, I had a visceral reaction in my body. Saturday night, I would start getting really sick, getting a headache. The thought of going to convention was kind of more than I could swallow. So, however, we did. John's sister was supposed to be out here on convention rounds. And it added a little layer of tension because she was going to come to our home, but she said she would come under the condition that she would talk CSA issues with us, but she would not talk any doctrinal issues with us. And we acquiesced. Some of me just makes me mad. Like how many times we just agreed, like, and yet our hearts were aching to talk about doctrinal issues, and no one would
Mm.
talk with us. So
Mm-hmm.
we went to a convention that we typically don't go to because she was there. And I remember walking into I guess it's a Ted or Shent or whatever, and I just could barely keep myself together. I was just my heart was grieving. And I just looked at everyone going, how are we all okay? Like, how are we all just not seriously on our hands and knees asking God for help? But then unfortunately, someone got up and said a prayer that my husband, he reached over and grabbed my hand because he probably knew either I was going to get up and walk out or I don't know. But the individual prayed. He goes, we're so thankful for all who are here, but we pray for those that could have been here, that chose not to be here. And we pray that you would trouble their hearts. And I remember thinking, oh, like you don't think their hearts are troubled enough that you want to add extra trouble to the people that have decided to not come to convention this year. So it set the wrong tone for me, of course. And then we heard a lot about passing the test and staying in the fold. And so that next weekend was gonna be our typical convention. However, one of the friends passed away and my husband was asked to be a pallbearer, so we didn't go. It was a convention, I will say, as I became an adult, Whitney, I probably should say that convention became very dear to me. I found my place. I found it's not about whether you have friends or not. It was just trying to get more and learn more about God, which I was so hungry for that. And so we didn't go to that convention, and our two kids had gone, and there were people coming up to them because we were not there. And one individual came up to our son and said, I hear your parents are out and they're trying to take everyone out with them. And here my son is like, what are you talking about? He never
Wow.
could figure out who had started that rumor. He feels like he knows. Again, we don't know what we don't know, but somehow that rumor was getting started because we weren't at that normal convention. So after that happened, where things always go wrong is when we don't reach out to the person that we have a question about. So our worker here reached out to our elder instead of just calling us and saying, hey, John and
Mm-hmm.
Darcie, how are you
Right.
doing? Are you still going to meetings? Because first of all, we had a Wednesday night rotation and a union meeting rotation. We certainly would have told the workers if we weren't going to go. But they reached out to our elders, unfortunately, and had a long conversation about us. And then our elder calls and talks to my husband. And during this time, do you remember there for a while, a lot of people were taking pauses? They would write, like, take a pause, or they'd write an exit letter or a pause letter. And so he had called my husband and said that the workers had called asking about us and saying that they noticed we were really struggling, which the struggle word just drove me crazy. Like, we're not
Mm-hmm.
struggling. And then later I realized, no, actually we were. We were struggling with what we thought was good and right and holy versus what had been presented to us in the last 6 months that was not holy and right or godly. So yes, we were struggling with that. We weren't struggling with our faith, but what was presented to us versus what we thought we had. And this is where, he said that it got convoluted, but again, I'm the kind of person that needs to be, when I ask God, like, he has to give me the shove out the door. And what this person proceeded to say next was pretty much the shove out the door. And he just said, well, you and Darcie, we used to love to listen to your testimonies, and you used to be feeders, but right now, maybe you just ought to take a pause. And I remember my husband, I wasn't there for the conversation. I was upstairs, and I remember my husband coming upstairs. He goes, "Oh, Darcie." And I'm like, "What now?" And he told me, and I'm just like, "What?" Because to be told, you know, it was weird because our elder also I would tell us at the same time, no, keep speaking truth. What you're saying is right. Keep speaking truth. But then to be told that we used to look forward to your testimony, like, how are we supposed to go to meeting knowing what to say now? Like, because I can't just pick a verse from Psalms and pretend everything's okay. That's not who I am. I was as real as the day is long in my testimonies, the good, the bad. Just, I wish there was more glorifying and praising back in the day. So we went for a few more weeks. And then I'll back up just a little bit. So I used to be a bank teller. And
Mhm.
oddly, I had a guy come in and, sometimes they'll rob bank tellers. So he put a gun in my face and blah, blah, blah. Well,
Wow.
and then the company I worked for, they handled it completely wrong, but I loved the people I worked for. I loved my customers. I loved the job, but like after that happened, like the joy was gone. My peace was gone. And I had like for that happened in March and I was going to leave that job in August. And then the people I worked with talked me into staying. And God had, even during that time, He had whispered, take a step of faith. Because I didn't have another job lined down. He's like, just take a step of faith. And so I was going to go to convention and actually I was going to quit working. But then I came back and that from August to November when I finally did quit, I had the worst feeling like I hadn't listened to the direction of God. So after that conversation with our elders, I was sitting in Wednesday night meeting and this feeling overcame me. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I've had this feeling before. And then this voice just came to me. This time, are you going to take that step of faith? And I realized I was having the same feeling when I stuck around the bank because of my coworkers that I loved and the job that I loved. God was telling me all along to take a step of faith, and I didn't. And now here I was presented with the same exact feeling. Like I loved the friends, I loved the community, I loved how we met in little homes. But God was saying, this time, are you going to take a step of faith? And so after that meeting, my husband and I talked and I wrote a pause letter. And we have never wrote an exit letter. We just,
Mhm.
we didn't get around to that part of it. We told them, there had been a huge, stumbling block to us being able to hear the voice of God. There was so many voices and we're thankful for all the information that was coming in, but it was so much, Whitney, that sometimes like I couldn't even hear God. And I likened our experience. I said, we're going to be like Elijah. We're going to go into the cave for a little bit and get alone with God till we can hear God's direction for our life. And I had put in there that please understand our door is open, our hearts are open. This is not us shutting you out. We still want to have honest, open conversation with people if someone wants to. But that never happens. And that's
Mhm.
what blows your mind. We're the only ones that still have left in this city. Now there was another couple that moved out and then left later, but here in our city, we are the only friends. And so when I say it's a little lonely, it's
Mhm.
it's been hard. We've moved 7 times because we always knew we'd have instant family somewhere. And
All
here
right.
all of a sudden, we're really truly on our own. And I remember my husband leaving town one day and I thought I was going to have a flat tire and I had a little meltdown going, who am I going to call? And granted but it was just all of a sudden this feeling of complete nobody and nothingness. And so when we did that pause, the workers finally did reach out to us because we were getting close to our union rotation again. And sadly, that conversation was when they walked out my door, I knew it was the last time. And it
Mm.
brought a huge sadness to me because I love them. But what I really want to speak to is the after step of faith. So much we hear about detangling and deconstruction and church hurt and church abuse, but there is the other side that is so beautiful and so it speaks to God's faithfulness, right? No story is worth telling if it doesn't speak to his faithfulness. So that was in September. And in February, I got a out of the blue text from the lady whose funeral that my husband was a pallbearer in that weekend over convention. She hadn't been professing for a long time and she knew we had left. She's like, "How are you and John doing?" I'm like, "It's been hard. It's been really hard." And I had listened to a podcast not too long before that, and he was talking about Elijah. And he goes, "Yeah, we all need those cave moments. We need to go in the cave." He goes, "But I'm here to tell you, friends, you can't stay in the cave." And I'm like, "Why not? It's really comfortable in here." But I knew that. Like, I love having spiritual conversations with people, and I knew I needed people to be able to still do that with, but I had no clue how that looked. And there's so many churches, Whitney. Like, how does one just go into a church? Apparently, people do it. I'm not that person. So, God knew I needed help. So, I get this text from this daughter, and she said, "Do you mind if I share your name with a good friend? And I think she'd be really good for you." And I said, "Sure." 5 minutes later, I get a text from a lady and she goes, "I would love to meet you for coffee and just hear your heart." And I remember just crying because that is what I needed from the friends and from the workers for them just to say, "Let me come hear your heart." And I kept saying, even through this whole thing, like, this didn't have to be this way. Like, this didn't have to be this way. This
Yeah.
didn't have to be this way. But it finally came to me, no, actually, it all had to be this way for us to see what we were a part of. Had it been done any other way, if people would have raced after me, if the friends would have shown up at my door, beaten down my door with coffee and pie, I probably would have been back where it's not healthy for me to be right now. So it had to be the way it was. And the Good Samaritan had to show up in my life. And she literally was the Good Samaritan. I would say, like, she bound my wounds. She did and went above and beyond. And one day, oddly enough, it's a crazy story. She knew exactly where we lived. It's a unique house that was built by someone that used to go to a church, the church that she goes to now. And so I would come home to little gifts on my thing with little encouragement. And one day I was just praying, like, "God, like, please just tell me I'm not alone." Because, we would have our good days and then we would have a slew of hard days. And
Mhm.
the one day that I just prayed, like, "Just let me know you still see me." I came home and there was this book that was so perfect for exactly what I needed. And it was from this lady. So I have 4 kids too. Our one son had left in July of 23. And I remember just bawling when I heard it, even though I knew he was going to be okay. I just remember being so sad that now he wasn't a part of what we were a part of. But then we left in September, and then our other 3 kids slowly have also left. Our one son that had left, they had started going to a church. So my husband went and he goes, "Okay," he goes, I think, because at first he's like, I'm never going to any church. Like, how do we trust people?" And I was the same way. Like, they may sound good, but what do they got? What are they hiding out there? And this cynical mind that comes to you. And again, we didn't expect them, our workers, to be perfect. We kind of just expected to be above reproach. That's all we were asking, and for honesty. So the same lady, I texted her. I said, "Well," I said, "I think we're ready to to come visit a church." Well, lo and behold, it couldn't be a small church, Whitney. So she goes, "Well, I would like to come pick you up and just walk you around the church when it's empty." And so she took me, and there was an 8:30 service, and she said, "I think this is where you and John will be more comfortable." And I guess a part of the story I did not tell is she actually had gone to meetings for a short time for about 2 years. Way back, this lady that had reached out to me, they were friends, but she right away, she had come out of the Catholic Church, and she goes, "I realized I had just replaced one set of rules for another set of rules, and there was no grace." And so she knew what the meetings were like, as far as, how small and quiet and everyone. So she sent us to the 8 o'clock service, which was full of old people. And it was very sweet. And John's like, he goes, I think we could do the 9:15, which, they have their worship music. And I will tell you, actually, the worship music is what moved my husband more than anything. There were so many times I would look over, and tears were streaming down his face. And so, where we're at with that, I really don't know. We've been going there for a year, and it's been good just to go in and kind of hide. But
Hmm.
yet I also know, I want the people in a reaction part of it. So we did actually join a book club there. We're going through a book right now. But the most important thing is what we learned of grace. And
Hmm.
those verses where it speaks in I think it's in Isaiah about beauty for ashes.
Mm.
So anything really, really hard in our life, like, to find the beauty in it, is the realization that we learned what grace is. And even when I was going to meetings the last 6 months, there was a song I happened upon called The Goodness of God. And I used to listen to it on the way to meeting, which I probably shouldn't have done because it always made me cry. So that's probably why I was all sad by the time I got to meeting. But today, when I was thinking about doing this video, we went to church this morning, and lo and behold, I was just like, God, okay, am I doing the right thing doing this video? I want to share, you know,
Mhm.
just a little and encourage people. And when that song came on, of course, my husband knew what it meant to me too. And he just looked over at me, and it was just kind of confirmation. Go speak of my goodness. And
Mhm.
ironically, someone in my family, one of the things I've said ever since we've stepped away is how good God is. Like, God is so good. And I said this to someone in my family, and she said, Man, you sound like one of those religious people. And I said, Well, if I do, I'm not going to stop saying how good God is. I mean, when Moses asked to see God, what did he show him?
Mhm.
His goodness. And
Mhm.
so I will sing of God's goodness until the day I die, because he is good and he is faithful, and he shows up in unexpected ways,
Mhm.
which that's what this lady was for me. You know, we expected maybe the friends here to call and see how we were. We expected the workers to beat down our door and go, "How can I help you?" But he sent other people in their place, because God never leaves a broken heart to themselves. He's gonna send that good Samaritan. And there might be many people that pass by you before that good Samaritan shows up, but guaranteed God will send the good Samaritan. So, and just the last piece that I want to speak to, which for me is a little personal, because I'm thankful that I left when I did. I can't imagine having left before. If there's anyone who's watching that has left and I was a part of your life and I didn't recognize that, I want to ask their forgiveness, because I can't imagine what that would feel like. But for the most part, people still kind of will talk, or if you text, they'll kind of do whatever, versus back then. But there's one friend of mine in particular that I literally lost. I lost her friendship. And they live on a convention ground, and I had a dream. It was before our friendship fell apart. I was literally on their grounds, and I see all these bees like swarming. I knew we were there, and I was with all these friends. I knew they were friends. You know how you know stuff in your dream even though you can't see faces. And there's this bee swarming, and everyone starts to run. And I remember seeing the convention barn, and I told myself, "Well, go in there, you'll be safe." And I go in there, and the bee follows me and stings my neck. And literally, Whitney, it was so real that I woke up holding my neck, like I could feel the pain. And then a couple months later, her and I had this conversation, and she told me she felt like she hadn't known the person that I was the last 12 years. Like, I was the one that was questionable. And I worked really hard to try to keep our friendship. But where I give her all the credit is where she said, I don't think we can be friends. And she's right, because how she sees things is so completely different than I do. But the reality of that is I love her. Um,
Mm,
and and so I hope someday, if I were to ever do a second video, that
mm,
I could speak to the restoration and reconciliation that God does in the hearts of people, because he does. But it may take time. And because when I make a friend, I'm probably loyal to a fault. So I remember when I married my husband, I said, I'm in it for life. Like that's the loyalty I have. So even for our religion, I was the same way. But I remember telling my husband, but if you ever are not faithful to me, it's done. Like we're done. And so I kind of, when this whole thing started with the meetings, I wondered, I'm like, am I being too hard-headed now because I've been betrayed, because I've been so loyal to this for over 50 years and I expected the same loyalty back. But and so even our friendship, when I become a friend, like I just want God to do his work in both of our lives, whatever that looks like, because what a beautiful story that will be if there can
mm,
be
mm,
true restoration and reconciliation.
mm,
And that's even for people still, there's families that have been torn apart. And so while I spoke to God's faithfulness on all these other stuff and how he's carried us forward, I still know the story's not done, because
mm,
I have great faith, because I know her love for Jesus is very real. It is very real, because she kept telling me we can't be friends because we don't love the same things. And I said, actually, that's the opposite. We do. We love the same things. We're just seeing them really different right now. So one
mhm.
day I hope there'll be a part two where I can tell you, Whitney, that God did his work there.
I really love that. I love ending on that note of the hope of what can be. And there's so much hope in the restoration and the reconciliation continuing forward. And I appreciate your bravery and your integrity and your kindness in how you go about the people that you've talked about, even in this story. I love the people that have showed up for you and bound up your wounds. And I love that you're doing that for other people. It's a really beautiful thing.
Well, thank you. No, but it's a beautiful story when we walk with God, even through the ashes, there's beauty.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your beautiful story.
Yeah, thank you, Whitney.
Yeah, I hope you have a really great day, Darcie. Thank you.
You too.
Yeah, bye.